Good afternoon, everybody. Could I have everyone sit down? Thank you so much for being here. My name is Neera Tandon, and I am president of the Center for American Progress. And I really want to thank you for joining us for this really critical conversation on how we can prevent gun violence and protect women in America. I have to just say I am incredibly honored to be here today to introduce Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and Captain Mark Kelly. In my book, they are both rare American heroes. Gabby Giffords transformed a terrible tragedy into an effort to protect others. She turned terrifying pain and struggle into an effort to protect our children, our families, and our communities. She could have retreated, but she chose to persevere. And for what they have done together, she and her husband, Mark, are, as I said, true heroes. I have to say personally, I honestly believe those who have witnessed her struggle and know how many lives have changed by gun violence each and every year, yet still choose to do nothing, should frankly be ashamed. But today, we have the opportunity to focus on what we can do, what we can change. And those who will lead the change when it finally happens will be Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome both to the podium, Mark Kelly and Gabby Giffords. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Gabby will be out in a second. You guys get to listen to me first. Sorry about that. You know, for most of my life, firearms have been a part of who I have been. You know, guns were a tool of the trade, not only for me while being in the military, but my parents, who were both police officers, my mom and my dad, in a place called West Orange, New Jersey, where I grew up. All right. Go New Jersey. And during my time in the Navy, where I served in combat over Iraq and Kuwait, a gun was a necessary tool for protection in the event if I was shot down over enemy territory. And living in Texas and Arizona for many years, as all of you, I'm sure, are aware, that firearms are part of the national heritage. And no matter what, Gabby and I are really strong believers in the Second Amendment. But we also know this: when you believe in something, you tend to cherish it. And cherishing your rights means also that you need to exercise them with a lot of responsibility. Now, Gabby and I are both responsible gun owners, and the vast majority of Americans who own guns are also responsible gun owners. And part of that commitment to responsibility is making sure that it is reflected in our laws. That means a number of things. You know, one thing is to have a background check before selling a gun to make sure that it does end up in the hands of somebody who will likewise act responsibly. It means giving law enforcement the tools that they need to protect the rights of the law-abiding and lock up the bad guys to keep our streets safe. And it means protecting the most vulnerable from the most dangerous among us. Today, we're talking about keeping guns out of the hands of men who stalk and abuse women. We're talking about passing laws that will absolutely save lives, especially the lives of women. For the past several months, Gabby and I have teamed up with the talented advocates behind the Violence Against Women Act, and with allies in Congress like Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Patrick Leahy to advance legislation that will keep guns out of the hands of stalkers and abusers. Today, we are closer than ever in doing this, but we can't do it if we don't all work together. Now, to talk about this critical issue, I'd like to introduce you to the most determined and courageous person that I know, a woman who does not fear or even acknowledge failure, who speaks with extraordinary bravery, and who inspires me each and every single day. My wife, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
Dangerous. Dangerous people with guns are a threat to women. Criminals with guns, stalkers with guns, abusers with guns, that makes gun violence a women's issue. For mothers, for families, for me and you. Women can lead the way. We common sense, we stand for responsibility. We can win our laws, win elections. Please join your voice with mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to a great discussion with this fantastic panel. We will be taking your questions after a bit of a discussion here. We'd like to organize it so that you write down your questions, and they'll be paper distributed, and if you have a question, just write it down, and they'll collect them, and I'll read from them. Again, I'm the president of the Center for American Progress, and changing our gun laws to ensure all of our community safety is really a priority for CAP. And so I'm really honored to be part of this, to have CAP as part of this event. You know, we all know the statistics. I'll just say a few of them. Every day in this country, 33 people are murdered with guns, and there have been 74 school shootings since Newtown. At CAP, we are, like Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly, dedicated to ensuring that our communities are safe through responsible gun laws. Today, we've put out a report, Women Under the Gun, that talks about the real challenges women are facing and how the use of guns and intimate partner violence is really a threat to women. Women are 8 times more likely to be murdered by a partner if there is a gun in the home. And simply put, the failure of the background check systems where they exist really do impact women. In the past 6 months, states have made great progress at passing their own legislation to protect women from gun violence. And a really critical point is, it's not just blue states that are passing these laws. Louisiana, very conservative states are passing them because people are standing up and saying these are a real challenge. So Without further ado, I'd like to get to our panel. I'll briefly introduce, and then we'll get right into Q&A. We're honored to have Senator Klobuchar here from Minnesota. She's a former prosecutor. She's leading up the legislative fight, and she's been a really strong friend on this issue and so many important progressive issues. Sarah Engel, who is a domestic violence survivor from Wisconsin. Police Chief Sandra Rhodes from Horry County, South Carolina, and Rob Valenti from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So I'm really honored to have you all here. And I'd like to start with you, Sarah. I would love it if you could just share with us your story and why you're here and why you think this is important.
Hello, my name is Sarah Engel. I'm from northern Wisconsin. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm here today to share my story in the hope that it will help save others from going through what I went through. On September 10th, 2008, my ex, James Lahad, shot and killed my mother. She was my best friend. He also held me hostage, raped me, shot me in the head, and left me for dead. At the time, I was living with my mom because I had left him. When I returned home that night, he was in my mother's house. Holding a gun, he threatened to shoot me if I did not do what I was told. He told me to take off all my clothes. He then taped my hands behind my back and tried to rape me. I convinced him to untie me, and I pretended that I wanted to have sex with him. I just wanted to get the gun away from him. But he kept the gun close at hand as he raped me all night long. Even when I had to use the bathroom, he would stand there and point the gun at me, always threatening to shoot me. He even shot the gun once to let me know that it worked. Then he made me get dressed. I assumed he would just go. I think I fell asleep. I don't remember being shot, but I remember jumping out of bed and telling myself to pretend to be asleep. I have no idea how long I was unconscious before I woke up. When I woke up, I didn't realize that I had been shot. I searched through the house to see if he was still there. I saw that my car was gone. He had barricaded the door to my mother's room. I had to break in. I remember her being cold. I remember telling her I would go and get help. I left the house frantically without my shoes. Someone on the road saw me and got me to a clinic that had just opened early that morning. I was taken to a hospital and don't remember much after that. I was told that because I was shot at such close range, my skin burned immediately, preventing me from bleeding to death. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. It was a month later, and I had been in a coma. As soon as I woke up, I immediately felt that I had survived so that I could speak out and help prevent others from becoming victims. That is why I'm here. I am living proof of how important it is that we do everything we can to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. My ex had a history of being abusive. He had active domestic restraining orders at the time of his killing, and he had faced criminal charges for domestic violence with his previous partners. I support laws and policies that will help keep guns out of the hands of people like him, individuals who have a history of being violent and abusive.
Sarah, I just want to thank you for sharing your story. It takes tremendous courage to do that, and it's incredibly touching. You talked a little bit at the end of why you're speaking out. It must be hard to do that each and every time you do, but what has motivated you to be here with so many people sharing a very tough story?
Well, I feel like more people, I try to tell people if you're a victim, if maybe we can start speaking more, it would, kind of scare them enough to back down, because a lot of times we get threatened if we tell.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. No, thank you. Senator Klobuchar, you're a former prosecutor. You've dealt with stories like this in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about what we can do to solve these problems in your legislation, and how it would actually address the challenges?
Well, thanks, by the way. I first want to thank Nira, you and Cap for hosting this event. And I was just sitting here thinking of the incredible courage of Sarah and Gabby. They didn't have to be here on this rather warm Washington, D.C. day. They didn't have to come and talk about this, how hard it must be to talk through it again. And I just am really of the view that if people listen to these stories, they think people at the Capitol, maybe I can just move a little bit on this issue and try to save some lives. And that's my hope in being here today. I'm joined today by two of our police chiefs from Minnesota. Chief Harteau, where are you, from Minneapolis? Our first woman police chief over there. We're excited about that. And also just to show that we do break the glass ceiling and have some male police chiefs in Minnesota. Chief Knight from Chaska, Minnesota is here. I really got involved in this issue as a prosecutor. Chief Knight remembers. We did some work together on this as you search for ways not only to go after the perpetrators and people that commit crimes. I worked really hard on enforcing the gun laws that were on the books, felons in possession of guns, other things, but also to look how to prevent the crimes from happening in the first place. You should also know, I was listening to Mark talk about the Second Amendment, near and dear to our hearts in Minnesota. We are a big hunting state. I see my friends from Duluth here. And we have a lot of law-abiding gun owners, and that's the vast majority of our gun owners. But we also know that we need to do a better job in making sure that people who are criminals, people who have severe mental illnesses, people who are violent should not be having these guns. And so that's what this is about today for me, and why I introduced this bill, which is a really focused bill on what I see as one of the loopholes in the law, and that is, first of all, for people that have been convicted of stalking. 1 in 6 American women have been stalked at one point or another in their lives. That's 19 million women. And it's women like Stacy of Ohio, who literally had a guy that she'd never had any romantic interest in. He keyed her car, he put nails in her tires, he created websites, he sent her emails, did all this kind of stuff. He pled guilty to stalking, and then one day he went out with a gun and killed her. And nothing prohibited him from getting that gun. And so that is why we introduced a bill like this. The second piece of the bill, which there's not only did CAP do a report, but every town has a report out today showing that 57% of mass shootings in America, 57% of shootings, and by the way, that is mass shootings defined as 4 or more people killed, are somehow related to domestic violence. And while we have a domestic violence prohibition on the books in our country, it doesn't extend to dating partners, something that a lot of states are starting to do right now, which is extend the definition of domestic violence to dating partners. So the bill is really quite simple at its core, and I've been talking to a lot of Republicans about it. We haven't had huge resistance to it yet, which is always a good sign in the Capitol, you know. And that is to make sure that the people who are convicted of stalking can't go out there and get a gun, and then secondly, that we have extended this definition to dating partners. And so we're continuing to work on it, and stories like Sarah's is really what drives me to keep doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And Chief Rhodes, I wanted to ask you, you lead a police force, you have officers responding to these calls and these kind of challenges every day. Can you talk about your experience with these cases and why you're here today and what motivates you to worry about this problem?
Definitely. There's actually multiple reasons that it's important to us in law enforcement, in particular South Carolina, because the state of South Carolina is ranked #1 for men killed by women, with the majority of those happening due to firearms. The other reason is that 30% of the assaults on police officers occur during domestic violence, when responding to domestic violence calls. And so it's absolutely important. I believe that 15% of the officers that are killed in the line of duty are killed while responding to domestic violence, with 95% of those being at with the use of handguns. So it's absolutely important to law enforcement that we address firearms and people that are convicted of criminal domestic violence being able, as well as stalking, being able to possess firearms.
And then when your officers go into a situation like that 30% or 15%, when they're in that situation where they're responding and there's a gun involved, they're responding to domestic violence, and then the perpetrator, a call around domestic violence or stalking, and there's a gun in the equation, what can a police officer do to change that up? I mean, how can they ensure their own safety in a situation like that?
Well, we've come a long way with training for police officers as well as the call takers and dispatchers so that we can ascertain that information. We can look back at the call history and see if the weapons had previously been used in other incidents at the home. But when we respond knowing that there's a gun or a weapon inside the home, it changes the way we respond. We have to determine whether or not we're going to use blue lights and sirens. We have to determine how many officers we're going to send there. So the presence of a weapon drastically changes the way that we respond.
Great, thanks, Rob. I wanted to ask you, Rob Valenti works with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You're really at the front lines of this challenge, right? You're hearing calls and seeing women's experience day to day. I know the hotline recently conducted a survey. Could you share the results of that survey with us?
Yes, absolutely. The hotline answers approximately 330,000 contacts a year, just to give you an idea of how many people are reaching out and needing help on domestic violence, dating violence. And many of them talk about firearms. And so we did a survey with them. It's a focus survey. We just really wanted to capture for everyone what victim advocates hear as they listen on the phones. And you have that information. I just wanted to be sure that you're all aware of that. If you don't mind, I would love to be able to give you some of those stories that they share with us. And I'm going to be careful to read this so that I don't miss any of their words because it's so important. We took this over an 8-week period, and we want you to know that firearms is a sign for the victim advocates that abuse is escalating. It's a very serious sign. We know that intervention is needed, and we know that we need interventions like the ones that Senator Klobuchar is helping to make happen. We also need interventions that are also being done in Congress by Senators Blumenthal, Murphy, Durbin, Congresswoman Capps, and Congressman Thompson, Congresswoman Gwen Moore. There are many champions out there doing this, and what they're doing really responds to what we hear. What we hear is, of those whose partners have access to firearms, 22% of them said that they used their guns to threaten them, to threaten to kill themselves, threaten to hurt the intimate partner, threaten other family members, threaten the children, neighbors, friends, even the family pets. This is, and I'm sure Sarah can back this up, this is a way to control the victims. So firearms are important, they do kill women, and it is bad, but we also know that they're being used to control women. One caller said that her abuser told their young child that he would shoot the entire family. This was a preschool child being told by the abuser that he would kill the family. Of those who said their partners threatened to cause harm with firearms, 65% of them said the threat was directed at the adult victim, and 54% said that their partner threatened to commit suicide. Firearms are a huge part of these cases. One woman said that her partner shot her while she sat in her car. Another said that her husband threatened to shoot her in the face. One of the women said her partner put a gun in his mouth while talking to her over an internet service. In another case, a husband recorded a video of how he would kill himself with a gun if she left him. If their partner had access to a gun, 10% of those who responded to the survey said their partner had fired the gun during an argument. We heard the story of a woman who said that during a fight, her partner shot a gun at her. Someone called the police. Her partner was arrested on a violation of a restraining order, but the gun charges were dropped. One partner in the survey said her partner sexually assaulted her with his gun when she refused to have sex with him. One participant said that her abuser cleans his gun in front of her and talks about how easy it would be to make her disappear. He said he wants to watch the life fade from her eyes. Of those who said their partners had threatened them with a firearm, 76% said their partner made verbal threats to use a gun. 24% of them said their partner waved the gun around. Think about what that means for those who are experiencing this. 25% said their partner pointed the gun at them or others. 30% said their partner left the gun out to create a feeling of fear. One caller shared the story about her husband who sleeps with loaded guns under his pillow. One night, she woke to the sound of him releasing the safety next to her head. His guns, she said, are regularly used to threaten her and abuse her. When asked if they knew that the court may be able to order their partner to surrender firearms and ammunition, only 34% of participants knew that that was available to them. Nearly 52% said they would feel safer if law enforcement took their partner's firearms. And the most chilling of all, 67% of those who responded to the survey believe their partner is capable of killing them. The longer we wait to act on all of this, the more women are killed. Doing nothing is not an option. We have to act now.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And what can you tell women to do now? I mean, obviously, there's the information about taking the gun away, but what's your advice and counseling in these horrible, horrible situations?
Well, first of all, please know that the domestic violence hotline is there for everyone. You will, on the materials that you have, you'll find the number. But what we know is that there are great police chiefs, there are great prosecutors, there are good courts. Victims can go and seek help by seeking a protection order. But as Sarah knows, a protection order isn't everything. Law enforcement also has to go out and seize the guns, and they have to hold them for the duration of that protection order. That's some of the work that we're hoping is done, and we know that the energy is there with folks like Senator Klobuchar at the helm to really address this, to really make that kind of difference. We know that we have to also make sure that victims are brought together with victim advocates. Maryland has a wonderful system which addresses lethality assessment. When victims are connected, as soon as law enforcement appears on the scene with a victim advocate, they can make plans. They can find ways to be safe. If we don't bring all of these pieces together, we're not doing them a service. And the last thing that I think we really all have to commit ourselves to asking be improved is the database systems that perform the background checks. On the state level and on the federal level, not enough data is getting in. If it's not there, the background check will not stop the abuser from having firearms.
And that's a point that we make in this report, which is some states do a good job of that, a lot of states don't, and it's really important for states to ensure that their background check information is up to date and really accurate. So, Sarah, I want to come back to you, and you've talked a little bit about being an activist and what you're doing, and perhaps you could share with us why you're here, what the progress you've made in Wisconsin is. I'm sure we'd love to get a sense of that.
I believe I survived for a purpose. My chances for survival were so small that I feel the need to use every opportunity to do everything I can to prevent domestic abuse and gun violence. In Wisconsin, I was part of the effort to pass the SAFE Act. The law will now require courts to actively make sure that when victims get restraining orders, that abusers are turning over their guns. I also speak out to community groups, students from junior high to college, district attorneys, and faith leaders. Domestic violence has caused me pain and heartache that I'll have to confront for the rest of my life. My hope is that by speaking out here today, I can transform that experience into something positive and help change the laws so that others don't have to lose a parent or a loved one.
Thank you so much again. Senator Klobuchar, when you hear stories like this, and know that this is an issue that's moving in conservative states and progressive states, is there a receptivity on both sides of the aisle? Are you hopeful about the possibility of making progress?
Well, based on my initial discussions on my bill, I am. And I also know that just this year, Minnesota passed a bill on stalking. They had a number of Republicans supporting it, as well as Democrats. We had, in fact, 11 states now have adopted stalking-type legislation that's related to gun violence, which gives me hope. And then you have the fact that there has been some movement, however slow it is, in Congress. We've talked a lot about the stalking and domestic violence provisions, but the background check is equally as important. And I see some friends here from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, A-rated from the NRA, and Senator Manchin from West Virginia, conservative Democrat, came together on that bill, and we were really so close to getting that done. As you know, all that did was close the gun show loophole, and then also made it easier to create incentives to get the data in. We have now, I think, 12 states that have less than 100 records in on the national database, and we're never going to be able to track this the way we should if we don't have that data on there. And so that gives me hope. And I will never forget that day. It was one of my saddest days in the Senate when that bill went down. I had the Sandy Hook families in my office that morning. And they knew that the background check issue in their particular case would not have saved their babies. But they had come together because they had looked at the numbers and decided this was something that could save the most lives. Because states that have the background checks, they have something like nearly 40% less domestic homicides, and they also have 50% less suicides. So they looked at it, what could save the most lives? So they're sitting in my office, and we have to tell them that we don't have the votes to pass that bill. And one of the moms told me the story of how they were all gathered in that firehouse that day after the shooting, and one by one the kids would come out of the school. And after a while, the families that were left knew that their kid was never coming into that firehouse. And the mom sat there, and all she could keep focusing on was the fact that her son, who was severely autistic, had this aide, a school aide, that he loved. And every morning he would look and point at her picture that she had put up on the refrigerator. And she thought in her mind that she knew that aide was never coming out of that school either, because she loved that little boy so much. And sure enough, when they found them both dead, the aide had her arms around that little boy. That's what those families went through. And to think that they then were able to put themselves above it all and think, what's the best thing that we can do to prevent other people from being killed, and came together on the background check, and then the Congress was unable to pass it, was a major tragedy. And so that's why I've doubled down on my efforts on the domestic violence and stalking side, as well as the background check bill that's still out there, because I think we have to be honest about and pragmatic about what can be done here. I look at every bill and say, does this hurt my Uncle Dick in his deer stand in Minnesota? No, he's okay. And we want to be pragmatic about how we move ahead and not cast some kind of blame on all gun owners. We just have to look at what will make the most difference. And that's why I think the bill I have, the work that Senator Blumenthal has done on restraining orders and some other things, as well as I still hold out for the Manchin-Toomey background check bill, that we keep moving those kinds of bills through Congress and never give up, because we will get something done. Thank you.
That means everyone will redouble their efforts in this room. I'm going to start asking questions. I have a few here, but I really invite people to send in their questions so we can get them. I see a few people. I will, and there's one over here. We do want to have a robust conversation back and forth. So, Chief Rhodes, Senator Klobuchar just talked about the changing dynamics on Capitol Hill, and hopefully even more increased changing dynamics after today. But are you seeing a change in your conversations with law enforcement in the community, are people recognizing the challenge around these issues, recognizing the problems of gun violence and the need to do something about it? How are you seeing the environment?
I most certainly am seeing some changes in attitudes, and being from South Carolina, pretty much like you all, we love our guns. And the feedback that I get from a lot of people is that criminals get, guns illegally anyhow. But in cases like this, with the criminal domestic violence deaths that occur due to that, most of the time the guns are legally owned. And the problem is that when they are convicted of domestic violence, or when that order of protection is out there, when we remove those guns and they are no longer able to access guns legally, it makes a huge difference. And I am seeing that most of the community are proponents for laws such as this. It's not our hunters. Like you said, it won't affect our hunters. It won't affect our, for the most part, our citizens, law-abiding citizens. It only affects the non-law-abiding citizens, or the crimes of opportunity when there's a gun in the house and the anger is raised. If there's already been an instance of criminal domestic violence, or there is a restraining order in place, or there is an order of protection in place, it's absolutely important that law enforcement removes those guns, that we make the effort to remove those guns, and I am seeing community support for that.
That's great. So I think this is a question really for anyone. Are there any non-legislative daily actions ordinary citizens can take to help curb this type of violence? From Matthew Peterson.
You're probably on daily actions.
Yes, I think that if we have people to speak up when a neighbor knows that there's domestic violence going on in a household, to call the police. That alone is something that our citizens can do, because we have a society now that doesn't want to get involved very much. And it's absolutely important on a daily basis, it's just your average citizens, to get involved and step up. Call the police. You don't necessarily have to go knock on the neighbor's door, but call the police. That's important.
I just did that a few weeks ago. I could hear screaming from my neighbor, and I saw him leave, and I was terrified, so I called the police, and then I was even more terrified. I'm like, oh gosh, they're gonna know it was me.
That's a fair.
Yeah, they would. That's great.
But she thanked me for calling.
That's great. Thank you. How can we ensure these proposed laws, this is from Jennifer Parsons at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, how can we ensure these proposed laws, when they're passed, are really enforced? And maybe you could take that
This
question.
is something, we have a good framework of laws already on the state and federal level. They're not complete. For instance, on the federal level, we only protect victims of domestic violence. We don't protect victims of dating violence or stalking. But what we really need to do is train. Get that information out there. When I have trained law enforcement on the federal laws, and I have trained state courts, and I am always amazed at how they are unaware of the part that they can play in really ending, the terror of firearms violence and these domestic violence cases. They don't even know they have these tools at hand. I think one of the most important pieces we can add to making these changes is to say we've got to get that information out to everyone. They really need to know that they have tools to work with.
I also would add in the Manchin Toomey bill are, the idea is that if you have the funding there and you look at incentives for states to actually get their data on the system. If the data is not on the system, there is no way if someone moves to check to see what kind of violations they had, or if they should be able to legally or law-abiding so they can get a gun. And that's one of the things that I think could really work if we started to create that culture, whether it's carrots or sticks, that you lose money if you don't put it in, but some way to get that money on the database would make a huge difference. And you see what we did, the federal laws, even if they're not major provisions, can move things because it's a national direction. And you think about even wearing seatbelts, right? That started out with some federal incentives in place that you'd lose some money. The drunk driving laws, a lot of that was some incentives in place on the federal level. The domestic violence training. These prosecutions for the most part aren't federal prosecutions. But when the federal government government says this is a goal of our nation, that we put this data so we can at least check to see if someone has a domestic violence or stalking conviction. It makes a difference.
Chief Rhodes, this question is for you. Guns seem to be playing perhaps an increasing role or a role in police response to domestic violence. So there's domestic violence, there's a gun involved. Are there barriers to immediate confiscation of the gun? And can we count on, and basically, do law enforcement officials, do you see more and more law enforcement officials recognize this challenge, and do you think they'll be advocating on behalf of such changes as well?
Most definitely. Simply because what threatens the victim in that household also threatens the officers that are responding to that household. And so law enforcement I'm glad that I've seen the progression of our response to criminal domestic violence, and it has been greatly due to training. I can recall that prior to us receiving some training from some of our criminal domestic violence advocates, our officers did not carry cameras to take pictures of the victims so that we could use those for prosecution, because what we found so often, and you all know this more than anyone, that oftentimes by the time we get to court, the victim has changed her mind or she has been intimidated into changing her mind, and just having that type of evidence helps us in our prosecution. And getting that first conviction is important to us so that we can prevent the homicide from occurring by taking those weapons once they are convicted of criminal domestic violence.
That's a great question. So this is a really great question. Because it gets to the kind of catch-22 we have in the situation, which are women are often afraid to file orders for protection or restraining orders if they know their partner has a gun, and will have their gun taken from them. What is the best way to get women to proceed anyway? I mean, it's the gun itself kind of makes people anxious about doing anything or raising. So how do you respond to those situations?
Well, this does
Rob.
come up in hotline calls, and I referenced before a program in Maryland which is being rolled out across the country, and the important thing is to connect the victim with a victim advocate, somebody who can really tell her what her options are, what her tools are locally, helping her find the best resources. We let victims do too many of these things alone. We don't stand with them. So we need someone who can take them through the complexities of the system, who know that they can call law enforcement and ask them to take away the guns. They can talk confidentially with a victim advocate in a way that they can't in other situations, so that they can really work out the different ideas of what might be best. I cannot, overemphasize that. And I just want to make a little pitch here. I know on the state level and on the federal level, the funding that helps support those services has just been eviscerated. And if you want to save lives, that's one of the tools that we need.
What we have in Hennepin County, where I was prosecutor, I had about 400 employees. It's the biggest county in Minnesota. And what we did is start a domestic violence service center, which was really at the cutting edge at the time when it was started. And it's a one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence. We have a place for kids to play. We have city attorneys and the felony attorneys that were the county attorneys working together. We had police officers there, and then we also have shelter advocates there, so that when a person walks in the door, they're going to be able to not just work the maze that's even hard for lawyers to figure out, they're going to actually be able to find out where they can stay that night, where their kids can stay that night, they can get a restraining order, they can get a case started and talk to the prosecutor and talk through what their options are, and we found that to be the best way to do it. And it's separate from our office, separate from the police, it's in the government center, but it's a one-stop shop.
I know when I speak out and I'm talking to students and people and they're asking questions, I always bring the wheel with, and I always say, whether you stay or leave, they're going to try to kill you. It doesn't matter. It's always a threat whether you stay or leave. So I'm like, it's better to leave. So that's kind of how I go with that.
And I also wanted to add that a lot of smaller police departments, as you know, don't have the funding for victims advocates. And so it's important for law enforcement who are quite often the first point of contact with the victim. Right. For law enforcement to be able to provide that information to those victims, that if she's afraid that he has a gun, well, let's move forward with these charges so that we can take the guns from him. And I think it's important for law enforcement to be able to convey that information to the victims as well.
Great, this is to you, Rob. As a high school teacher, it's Kristen Wald from Moms Demand Action, New Jersey. As a high school teacher, I saw incidents in New York City and threats, intimidation, physical and emotional control between teens. Is there a mechanism for teen abusers to keep their abusive, stalking behaviors on record when they become of age? And are there basically just different concerns with younger and older folks?
We definitely have a teen dating abuse issue in this country. One of the services that the National Domestic Violence Hotline offers in partnership with Break the Cycle is loveisrespect.org, which is a teen dating abuse resource. And there are a lot of pieces of information there that can help. Every state's different, and it is true that in some states, juvenile records will be kept quiet, but we also know that when you work with teens, you really have a chance to make a change. Adult behavior is much harder to change. A lot of teen behavior is susceptible to learning more about what respect is in a relationship and how to really move forward in a relationship in a positive way so that everyone is supporting each other. And I think that's something that we need to focus on. If we want to worry less about what's happening to the adults, maybe in a generation, if we invest now in teens, we can make a change.
Great. I guess, Senator Klobuchar, I wanted to get a sense from you. Where do you see us going in this issue? You talked about the Manchin-Toomey bill, this legislation. Can you give us a sense of the arguments we should all be making on Capitol Hill, what the prognosis is? Do you think Manchin-Toomey could get brought up again?
Yes, I think that we have seen in recent months a number of tragic shootings from what we saw in California to what we saw recently, that horrible shooting in Las Vegas with the 2 police officers, and so there's just been a lot of tragic shootings going on around the country. And you know, sometimes you just remember the ones that are on the news. But I think you all know the woman I told you about that was a victim of stalking and someone was keying her car. That never was on the national news, right? And so every single day we have victims of domestic violence and stalking that are then become victims of shootings. And so I think it is out there and it is strong. Election time is not always an easy time to get any bill passed, but I think it's really important to start the drum roll to get people interested in thinking about this, not only with the background check issue as a whole, but also its relationship to women and domestic violence and stalking. And when you talk about it that way, people listen because they've seen some of these recent cases. They all know, while maybe some of these cases aren't on their national news, they know about someone in their own community. They know someone who's a victim of domestic violence who's been threatened with a gun. They know that their daughter's friend has been stalked by someone. They all know those stories. So I think getting that out there, and I've got to continue my work and building Republican support for this bill. It does happen. I have one of the best track records of passing bills with Republicans in the Senate. So I will continue.
Whatever that secret sauce
That's good.
is.
No, it's good. So I'm going to continue that work. But I think just as our friends from Pennsylvania know, and working with Senator Toomey, it can happen. And I think that you just can't be judgmental about the people, no matter how mad you got at them for some other bill or you have a disagreement with them on another issue. You really have to reach out and make this case. And I think that's what we have to be doing over the next few months. And there certainly continues to be discussions about this with each and every one of these shootings.
So this question really builds on that, which is what arguments is the opposition raising? So when you're talking to Republican senators or Democratic senators. What are the things that they're worried about with this legislation? How can we best respond to them?
I actually have heard very few worries about this exact legislation because, as we know, it's really focused on one issue, and that is stalking, and that is domestic violence. It is nothing that is going to hurt law-abiding citizens, and I think they know that. I think the concern is that things can get twisted and talked about in another way, so it can hurt them with those Uncle Dicks and their deer stand. That's my uncle. And so I think it's really important that we get the truth out, and having someone like Mark Kelly out there talking about, and then reaching out and focusing on this issue of women that are victims of domestic violence and stalking, I think is a really good and smart way to talk about this issue. So you're then focusing more on the victims than you are, which is what we should be talking about, than on the other end of it. And so that's what I'm going to continue doing. And I think the fact that we were so close on the background check bill should give people hope. And that people were pretty chastened by that, and that for those that voted the other way in some of their states, that there was a pretty big uproar after that. You know, I'm hoping we can ride that tide of just plain citizen grassroots involvement where people are smart. The people we represent understand that this isn't about taking guns away from law-abiding citizens when we're talking about people who have been convicted of stalking and people who have been convicted of domestic abuse. And so that's what we have to go with.
So I think this is just an inquisitive question. It's from Shiva Padram. With regard to stalking laws, do law enforcement need to wait for stalkers to physically harass or attack their victims to take action, or can they take action to prevent that from ever happening?
No, we don't have to wait for physical contact at all. It's the actions, and each state has different laws and requirements, elements of the crime. But there are elements that don't require the physical contact for us to be able to take action, so no.
And then I think on your legislation, there's a question, does this legislation do anything to remove guns from those who have an order of protection against them? Hannah.
Okay, so what this legislation is focused on is people with stalking convictions, and so that is not really about order for protection. And then secondly, it has a component about the dating partners, which a lot of states are starting to add to their definition of victims of domestic violence. And then it does have some a focus on the restraining order issue. I would also point you to Senator Blumenthal's bill, which is specifically focused on temporary restraining orders and making sure that people that get those orders against them can't go out and get a gun. And so that's something that he has just introduced yesterday, I believe, or at least did an event talking about it, and that he's going to introduce if he didn't do it yesterday. And I think that would get more into that realm than this particular bill.
And I just wanted
Yes,
to
please,
add,
Rob.
I just wanted to add to that, as you do this, know that the first time a victim reaches out for help is the most dangerous time. When they reach out for a temporary restraining order, when they reach out to law enforcement, when they seek a permanent protection order, they have put the abuser on notice that they're not going to be a victim anymore, and that really can escalate the abuse intensely. So it's so important that we address that and that we work on that. The most dangerous time for a victim, tell everyone that, is when they first start to seek help because the abuser loses control. So we have to get that message across because that's what these different forms of legislation are trying to get to.
Did you want to add anything?
I know, like for me, when, once you've been in an abusive relationship, you're going to go to the next and the next. It's always going to be different. I remember being married and he was physically abusive and I left him and he tried to break into my place and kill me, but he didn't have a gun. But I got a restraining order on him. I kept that on him. I didn't talk to him. And then when I got with the last guy, the first time I got a restraining order on him, he said he went to therapy and I thought there was something mentally wrong with him. And he got better. The last time I left, and the day I had to see him the last day, he threatened me that day and he said, "You're gonna pay." And he took my mom, and he thought he took me. So.
Thank you. I have to say again, Sarah, thank you for your just courage in sharing your remarks with us. Thank you to all the panelists for all you're doing every day, both on the front lines and to protect women and in Congress to protect women. But Sarah, I think we're really just grateful. You know, it's hard to see inaction in the face of your story, so I hope we can get more and more people to hear it. Thank you very much. Thank you all.